Welcome to the Gurmat Experience, a mind-blowing podcast that dives deep into the intersection of science, spirituality, mysticism, and consciousness. This isn't about just answers, it's about exploration. Today, we're going to reflect on another very big question, a dialogue between master and student, Master Dav Panesar and Sonia Kaur. In the first podcast, we explored why are we here? Who am I? That big, fundamental existential question that deep thinkers, philosophers, and scientists have been exploring since the beginning of humanity. Now we're going to go into something a little bit more juicy. Okay, so following why are we here, we're going to go, okay, what's the point of being here? What is our purpose? What, this big, meaningful search for purpose. Many of us feel this pressure to define our purpose. We think it has to be monumental and change the world and ultimately leave a legacy. But my question here would be, okay, what is our role in this vast existence? Davji, over to you.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Sonia, once again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you for sitting with me and giving me your ocean and endless wisdom.
If only. Okay. We spoke about who am I last time. I think the question really would have been, that was answered is how am I? How do I come to be? Yeah, forget about who am I. And the who bit then breaks down into consciousness, emergence, happening, and the conditioned sense of self, right, which we can explore. But here we're now saying, all right, what's the purpose? Well, if you identify yourself with your egoic sense of self, your conditioned sense of self, then your purpose is to demonstrate to the world how clever you are, to collect all the titles you can, to make sure you're the most beautiful, you're the most successful, you're the most powerful, you have prestige, you have status. It depends on your measures of success based on what you identify with. So if you've been brought up into a social system, a culture where you have no knowledge of consciousness and you're simply given your conditioned sense of self is kind of cultivated into, well, in order for you to have a measure of success, you need to become a doctor or you need to become a this or that or the other, then you will pursue this. So remember last time I spoke to you, I was talking about you enter a game and they've changed the rules, but no one's told you the rules that they've changed. Well, the rule is this. They've effectively diverted awareness away from awareness itself towards the conditioned sense of self. And that conditioned sense of self, the egoic sense of self, always functions on these two foundational principles. It is always deficient, which means it always wants more. And the second thing is it's always feeling insecure. So it needs more money, it needs more security, etc. And as a result of those two fundamental aspects or the wings of an egoic sense of self, I don't like the word ego, egoic sense of self or egoic complex, those two wings that make it fly and do its things, then social systems use that fear and security or provision of security as the levers to manipulate the players in the game in order to benefit someone else and not the player. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense only because I've been a student of yours for the last 10 years. What I would say to that is, yes, it makes sense. And this egoic sense of self, and what they define as humma in Gurmat, which you can dive into a little bit more, is reliant, its sense of security is reliant on the material world.
Sure.
The material form being, what Gurmat would call Maya. Anything to add on to that?
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that, again, you asked the question, the purpose. So the purpose is dependent on the kind of cultural wisdom that you are graced or not graced to be part of. Now, let's actually define what is it that existence, this temporary little, how is life defined? Life is defined as an icicle in a fire. Every single day. Isn't that you get older, but the expiry date becomes closer, right? When we begin to realize that there is an end date to this, and all that I have collected, all that I have done, of what use has it been? So we will find that people have got great knowledge, people who can quote scripture to you, people who can tell you about quantum physics, people who can, sociology, people who can geography, zoology, every single ology. There are experts in it. But the reality is hardly anyone knows who they are, what they are, or how they are. So the purpose of life is the investigation of these fundamental requirements in order for you to do there are two outputs to this. One output is the cultivation of health. By addressing these questions, or by looking at investigating these questions, the only way you're going to discover what you're about is to go inwards. And to go inwards, there is a methodology. 99% of people do not like to sit by themselves. Being alone is considered to be one of the highest forms of punishment, what do they call solitary confinement. So this being alone doesn't, because we keep ourselves so distracted and entangled in the world around us through our sensory systems and the mind, that we fail to move inwards. So in order to explore our purpose, the idea is first to begin to recognize where to look. And this is where wisdom traditions come in.
Wow. Embracing the unknown is I would call it a byproduct of self-inquiry, right? Having to face the impermanence of life. And these questions, they don't have easy answers. They're very complex, and maybe they're not meant to. What if the real purpose of life is to engage with these mysteries, to grow through the act of asking? And you just categorically said it is an investigation.
It's an
investigation into and to inquire into the truth of who and what we actually are.
Yeah, it's very personal.
It's very personal, and I feel like that's what you've always taught me. And purpose itself is not easy to define in words or language. It's a lived experience.
Yeah, and I would go as far as saying life is purposeless in the way we define purpose, right? You tell me all the people that have lived and died. What purpose? You understand? Life in itself, we give it purpose. We give it meaning. We give it, some kind of form, some kind of a story in order for it to reflect that X and me or whoever else has had a purpose. But the reality is we're a happening. What purpose does a wave have? Think about it. What purpose does a wave have? It's a happening. It comes, it's here, and it goes. But in that moment, in that little icicle that's sitting in the fire, in that little flash of lightning, which life is, there is a moment to discover what that is. Who am I? And to know who am I is now to move in. And in this movement in this investigation and exploration, which has to begin with first, someone has to tell you the footprints. Someone who's already walked that path. So you need an individual who has walked that path and tell you the signposts. Then the other thing is, because the rules have been changed, and I'll demonstrate this very clearly, language has been changed where meanings has changed to the words. And as a result, you may be reading one thing which means totally different to you today than what was actually meant by the author. So these rule changes actually not confuse, it keeps the herd, humanity as a herd, into a particular pen, which is basically a recycling pen. A pen that recycles, and by recycle I mean transmigration, reincarnation. And how do we answer that question is, well, ask yourself the question, why am I born in this particular family, with this particular mother, with this particular father, with this particular siblings? with this particular relationships. And you will find the whole thing works within this karmic foundation, which we will discuss in more detail as we move along this. So these are the discoveries, but the reality is none of this needs to be known if you know the method of how to look in and what you will find as you move within yourself.
Wow. I think, Davji, life is a numbing process until you start to experientially inquire into yourself, as Gurmat therapy has taught me.
Sure.
You know, the moment you start to inquire into yourself, things start to get colourful, things start to get spicy. You start to see your own dirt. You
Absolutely.
know, and I think we'll explore this on another podcast to do with the mind.
Yes.
You know, to do with the egoic complex and just generally the autopilot patterns of the mind. You know, I think it's important to discuss that. And now bringing it back to the search for purpose, what would you say to somebody who would say, okay, you know, if I am just one of these waves, I'm just a happening, etc., then why have I been given this level of consciousness? Why have I been given this highest level of consciousness as a human if I'm just a happening?
Well, the first thing is there's an assumption that this is the highest form of consciousness, right?
Mic drop. Boom.
There's an assumption. It's not actually. And we will explore the idea of what is it, human potential. What is human potential? What does it mean to be human? And that's a whole new exploration in itself. So the highest form of consciousness, as I said, is an assumption. So consciousness has stages and states, yeah? And through self-inquiry, guidance, recognizing the signposts, we go through a process. So within the Buddhist tradition, the Taoist tradition, they've broken it down into 10 stages, right? The 10 bulls of Zen, or the ox herder. Within the Hindu space, it's 7. These are just wisdom traditions, right? I believe in the Fathers of the Desert, the Christians, there were 6. And within Gurmat, there are 5 stages. So there are states and stages of consciousness. State is like when water goes to liquid and ice, and it can then go back to liquid or ice. So states are changeable. Stages are permanent. Through self-inquiry, guidance, we go through these various stages and states which are experienced as transpersonal experience. The very act of looking within yourself, we encounter first the nature of the mind, because everything begins and ends with the mind. So as we look within ourselves, we begin to explore the nature of the mind. Through exploring the nature of the mind, our thoughts, we begin to explore the components of the mind. We then come across the debris of our emotional content. We then come across the debris of some of our, I would even go as far as to say some of our karmic patterns. And as a result of self-inquiry, and as Gurmat therapy has demonstrated categorically, through the experiential nature of some of those meditations, we begin to cultivate silence, we begin to cultivate stillness, we begin to cultivate timelessness with awareness. And through that awareness, we are able to then discern the mental traffic that we need to engage in or disengage in, and therefore provide ourselves some level of clarity and clearance in cultivating this path towards transcendence. And what does that mean? That means you're not that special.
Wow. You know, thank you, Davji, for blessing us with your ocean, endless and also witty abundance of wisdom. We're never ever going to get enough of it, and it's always going to shut me up, I'll tell you that. As we end today's journey, let these questions echo within you, guys. Like, why are you alive? What are you truly here to do? These aren't just philosophical musings, they're invitations to wake up to the extraordinary within the ordinary and to step into a life with intention and depth. This is what Gurmat is about. So thank you for being part of the Gurmat experience. And remember, the questions you hold today have a lot of power to lead you into a more fulfilling path in life. Stay open, stay present, and trust the unfolding of this journey. Until next time, thank you, Davji.
Waheguru Ji Ka
Khalsa,
Khalsa,
Waheguru
Waheguru
Ji
Ji
Ki
Ki
Fateh.
Fateh.